So Israel has stopped the aid from going into Gaza about 5 weeks ago, and now is considering actually resuming it. Why? Well, because aid in Gaza has been running out, and this actually wasn't any attempt to actually finish this war or to actually wage the war properly. More of a thing, maybe some temporary thing to show. Well, we'll cover what exactly has been happening, as well as some of the reactions that Israel has been getting for the policy itself, and also for repealing it. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today is Michael Kaufman and Anders Ingemarsson. Thank you guys for joining me today. And I'll go to you, Michael, first. I think I'm not sure if you were on some of the episodes that we've covered about the blockade itself. I think so. But yeah, what do you make of Israel's attempt to resume? Basically, military has said to resume the Gaza aid shipments, basically under the pressure, and they've said they will do this sort of program where they will do some of the aid directly to some of the Gaza civilians, so it doesn't reach Hamas, and it bypasses Hamas. What do you think of that?
I think it's appalling. I think it's aiding and abetting the enemy. I think it was appalling when they did it to begin with. The rules that only apply to Israel and have never applied to any other war ever in the history of humanity. Many wars were actually won by starving out the enemy and causing surrender. And I can't fathom, and I may have missed this, that the US is putting any significant pressure under Trump. I can't believe they'd be putting pressure on Israel to do this. And frankly, that's the only opinion that matters. Now, you can argue whether the US opinion should matter ultimately, but certainly no one else's opinion matters at all. And the US is the only one that could matter. And the fact that there's no pressure that I'm aware of from Trump, and in fact, quite the opposite, I think if they are going to do this, there's some ulterior motive here, which cannot be to win the war.
Now, when it comes to sort of Trump's pressure, I'm not sure if there is anything specifically when it comes to this, but of course there was the White House meeting yesterday that I think went a bit less than ideally, even sort of from the Trump part. To go to you, Anders, basically this information about the resuming of aid was received by the media, I think, on Monday. The articles were released, and then IDF tried to comment on it, saying, in response to this morning's publication about humanitarian aid, the IDF operates according to the directives of the political echelon. Israel does not transfer and will not transfer any aid to Hamas. So, sort of trying to cover themselves, basically saying, none of this will go to Hamas. But of course, we know any aid that goes into Gaza will reach Hamas. Either will go directly to Hamas, and Hamas will keep it or store it, or they will use it to sell it to the people, meaning they get actual money, they get resources to continue the war. So yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, I'm basically echoing what Michael just said. That I mean, the whole thing is appalling, and this individual statement from the IDF, as you said, we know that it will go to Hamas, but also again, why resume it at all? That's the main question. I mean, it should not have been resumed at all early on in this conflict. I mean, as we have discussed many times on this program, if Israel would have applied a shock and awe war, that would have been over in a month or a couple of months shortly after October 7th, we wouldn't even be here discussing this today. So more and more as this drags out, longer and longer, and as I understand it, a lot of the focus in Israel, the public opinion there, is very focused on still bringing home the remaining hostages, dead or alive, which, yes, you feel for the families, but it's I mean, it's so out of context, unrealistic, and to think about that, to make that the priority above everything else. We will just see a repeat of what we've seen over the past 40, 50 years or something like that. It will just continue and continue. And personally, I must say, it's a mix of anger and sadness when you see how Israel is really its own worst enemy in this whole conflict, as it was in past conflicts as well. And my sympathies are obviously still with the Israelis, but there is an element of, guys, you asked for it, creeping into my thinking about this whole thing, because I'm starting to lose patience.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at sort of the Israeli actions, not only after October 7, but even before, going into October 7, it's not like that attack was any surprise. A specific date that it happened might have been a surprise or something not expected. But we knew Hamas was going to attack. We knew Hezbollah was going to attack. We knew Houthis would join. We know all that because the only reason why those organizations exist is to threaten Israel, is to fight against Israel. It's not like, we sign a deal with Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis, and they would accept it or they would want it. They have no desire to make peace. The only reason, again, they exist is to get rid of Israel from Middle East at the very least, if not, go hunt after them across the world. And so yeah, going a bit further about this, at first, sort of the stop of the aid from going in. So when the ceasefire started with Hamas, something that happened was there was actually more aid allowed to go in. Uh, what that meant is that when Israel has actually stopped the aid from going in, they still had enough fuel, enough aid to basically last them. I think even right now, it's said that they still have pretty much few weeks. So what has actually happened is that Israel did technically stop it, but they still had it. So nothing actually happened. No blockade actually achieved anything of significance. And now, where we are starting to reach that point where the Palestinians would start running out of aid, now Israel is pretty much going to resume it. And you cannot, again, you cannot fight a war like that. Anders talked about how if this was done swiftly and immediately, then we could see actually some ground happening in Gaza. We could see something different happening with the Palestinians. But the fact that this was from the start viewed as a war on Hamas rather than the war on the ideology that made Hamas possible, the ideology that is driving Palestinians, that did allow them or contribute to them, celebrating October 7. We will go back to the place where nothing will actually change in Gaza, and we might get some hostages back. Unfortunate part is that most of the hostages are already dead. So even when it comes to getting them back, we have, I think, about 2 dozen of actual living hostages, and then we are simply negotiating for the bodies. But the future hostages, the future victims of the Palestinian violence might still happen because we haven't actually solved anything. So, what do you think, Michael? What do you think drives what is happening with Israel? Does Israel actually want to win this war? Um, Even, let's say, even if we ignore the sort of international pressure, and maybe we cannot sort of ignore it completely, but when it comes to actually wanting to live, actually wanting to preserve the nation, uh, does Israel actually want to? Does Israel understand what at stake when it comes to Gaza?
Well, I think one other fact that we should keep in mind is that Israel is supposedly raining down hell on Gaza. Now, this is not what Trump intended when he said that. What they're doing in Israel is this piecemeal operation in different parts. It's largely surgical. It is certainly not carpet bombing. There's no question there's more and more destruction every day, but without the Biden-Harris gloves on and restraints, it is unfathomable to me, actually, how Israel is continuing the war, and they're going to send in, they already have more ground troops in there, putting more soldiers at risk. And they are continuing this thing like it's some kind of police operation instead of an actual war against a terrorist group that wants to keep fighting and who pretends to have some kind of legitimate bargaining position in this whole thing. And that bargaining position went away when Biden and Harris went away. Let's be clear, because the only thing holding up Israel, in fact, was Biden-Harris. There is zero reason for Israel to give a damn about the current world pressure. The UN is under siege. Trump has put a stop to that. They're not funding UNRWA. UNIFIL is probably going to go down as well. The US is out of the United Nations so-called human rights group, which is, and I say so-called because we all know it's baloney. And frankly, what the Western leaders, so-called leaders, many of the Western leaders want is not important to Israel anymore, because there's a unifying voice now in the White House that says these people are enemies. Now, that unifying voice is also beating the crap out of the Houthis. And yeah, the Houthis can send off a missile every now and then, but the destruction that's being wreaked on Yemen is wonderful from a world point of view, to tell the terrorists, we're just going to bomb the heck out of you, putting almost zero American lives at risk until you surrender. And we're just going to keep doing it. And by the way, Trump, as far as I know, is not even involved in the bombing raid. He doesn't even care about the actual tactics. He told his generals to go in there and annihilate these people, which is what they needed to do, because international shipping needed to be restored. Although it's very little US shipping, by the way, international shipping needed to be restored, etc. This is what Israel should be doing in Gaza. Not this constant, they're playing, the playbook they're playing as if Joe Biden were still in America. And it's indefensible. And this fake baloney about that the Israel is really doing something about the hostages. We all understand that Hamas is going to fight this thing until the death, which probably means they're going to have to be starved out, because cleaning up the last vestiges of these tumor cells is going to take a long time to do it with bombs and missiles without sending in a whole ground force and going house to house. And frankly, until Gazans actually revolt, and there's occasional protest, but until the Gazans revolt and start to arrest the Hamas people and surrender, it's never going to stop. And I honestly, and Anders and Dana, I am completely baffled, not in a way that is similar to what Anders is saying. The motivations for Israel's lack of definitive behavior at this point is inscrutable, and it is extremely concerning.
Yeah, I mean, Anders, you talked earlier about sort of being not sure if angry or disappointed at Israel, but basically sort of almost confused about what Israel is trying to do, what it wants to do. Now, we are not, when it comes to Western nations, it is not uncommon to see sort of compromising, not actually doing anything, on the political domestic scene. But when we talk about an actual wars, we are talking about lives. We are talking about the both the lives of current soldiers, not to mention the lives of future soldiers, as well as future civilians. If something like Hamas or some other group, even if Hamas, we get rid of Hamas, some other group representing this idea of Palestinian militarism continues to exist against Israel. So, is Netanyahu not understanding that, or what is at play here?
You're asking me to comment on Israeli domestic policies, which I'm probably not the expert, but looking at the outside from what I've seen, it seems like, well, Netanyahu seems to be in constant crisis mode in terms of managing his own political career, and whether it's lawsuits or this later Qatar gate that has surfaced, which, to the extent that that is true, that Qatar has been actually paying off high Israeli officials. I mean, that's obviously a scandal in and of itself. And I don't know what the dynamics are here. How is that impacting what's going on in Gaza now? And we know that if there's one thing that Netanyahu is good at, it's saving his own skin. And I wouldn't be surprised for him personally that Gaza takes at least temporarily, has a lower priority because he has more urgent personal fires to fight right now. But that's obviously pure speculation on my behalf.
Yeah, and so Michael earlier mentioned the idea that any sort of starvation that happens on the Gazan part, and I want to go into that a little bit because I think even I saw an article by the CNN that wrote a little bit about this, which I think they called it, what do they call it, a war without limits, which again, this idea that you fight a war while while providing aid to your enemies, and again, that is inspired by this ideology that sort of people do not actually decide their government, they do not actually decide their ideas, they do not decide the governments that represent them, and therefore they're always sort of victims of a war. So you have Hamas that has imposed itself on Palestinian population. So now we have to surgically get rid of Hamas without sort of uh, hurting the innocent Palestinians. That is sort of the Western view. But that is simply not the case. No dictatorship, no matter how authoritarian, 1984 is fiction because such a capable totalitarian government is non-existent. People have to be complacent with the government they are living under, even if it's doesn't matter if it's a democracy, doesn't matter if it's a dictatorship. You cannot rule by iron fist without some support, without a support of some part of your population, and usually large parts of your population. Once people are so discontent with the regime, they will get rid of it. Those automatically collapse. You cannot retain it for long. That's why, once people decide they want something different, let's say in the 90s in Eastern Europe, once people decide they want something different, you cannot stop it. You can either, and sort of the ruling party can either let it go because they realize it's gone, like in the most more peaceful revolutions like the Baltics or Czechoslovakia, or they can try to shut it down, like in Hungary or Romania or East Germany, and they will also lose because once people decide they do not want to live under such regimes, it's no longer possible. And sort of now going into Gaza and how that fits. When you try to take away Palestinians from Hamas, Palestinians have no reason to get rid of Hamas. It is a government that represents them, yet somehow we think of them as separate. And Palestinians have no reason to stand up. Now we've heard some families in Gaza sort of trying to stand up to Hamas. It's important to say that those families are something that allowed Hamas to rule a bit stronger since they could rule through them. But now that their power is a bit threatened, they're starting to stand up. But the Palestinians themselves and the ideas that made Hamas possible are not gone. They are still here. And unless something changes to them, unless they realize, similar to Germans during World War II or Japanese during World War II, that, oh, we've lost and we've lost hard, and now we need to change. I've seen one video of an American going into Japan and asking all Japanese men if he feels resentment towards Americans or America. He said no. When he was a child, he wanted to learn English. He wanted to sort of embrace this new culture. He wanted to embrace because they've lost, and any a rejection of West, any sort of promotion of what happened during World War II is a type of surrender, is a type of going back into the ideas that lost the war, and that is not something that is happening in Palestinian with Palestinians, and that's why you cannot provide aid. You need to stop it, and if let's say an actual starvation starts happening, which we have been hearing for like over a year now that there has been, we don't have a single person who died from starvation. But when it starts happening, then Palestinians have to choose. Would they rather starve or would they rather surrender? And if they would rather starve, I mean, the best you can do is give people volition, is give people ability to choose their own destiny. And uh, if let's say during World War II, Japanese people have decided to starve instead of surrender, that is on them. We cannot force them to actually want to live. Uh, I mean, going to you, Michael, people talk about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and sort of the starvation, but how else can we deal with people rather than by giving them what they wanted? Palestinians wanted war on October 7th,
Yeah.
and we've given them something very different.
Well, I don't see any. I see complete consistency with the CNN article and its their general CNN position on pretty much everything. And CNN, like most leftist, quote, woke progressive outlets and people that are involved in this, believe fundamentally that most people are stupid and that there's a set of elite people who that volition really isn't an important part of anything. And really, it should be left up to the elite, educated, woke, knowledgeable, insightful people. I guess they mean like AOC and Bernie Sanders, because those are the people that are sort of in the front, and Hakeem Jeffries from New York. That's the way you need to treat people. And therefore, the people that live in Gaza who have been educated to hate and kill Jews, and basically they've been taught to be Islamic militants, and they all are Islamic militants. They don't know any better. They're just poor little children who need to be shown the way. And if we can't show them the way, you never want to do that by force, because then somebody might get hurt. But you just have a little conversation with them. You play a little bit of Mozart for them, and then you read them some Shelley or some Keats poetry, and maybe have a little constitutional class, and you'll all just get along, and then you can talk about how the terrible Israeli oppressors oppress them, and if they were just given a bigger state with more greenhouses, they could destroy all of the greenhouses everywhere instead of just the greenhouses that they destroyed in Gaza, and so on. That is completely consistent with the current leftist progressive woke view of the world. And it is anti-volition. It is anti that a person, an adult, is their own representative or individual. It's anti-individualistic. And it enables Islamic militancy and Islamic totalitarianism, because after all, we should just have a nice conversation with them, all while Iran is building a nuclear bomb to blow them up right after the conversation is done. So the naivete and the bullshit being spewed by the leftist propaganda machines, it continue. And it's, if anything, they're doubling down on it with Trump in office, because they've decided, after they got completely clobbered in the election, that they should continue and get worse in this regard. And I don't see the validity of any of these places is gone. And it gets to the heart of the matter of what you're talking about, Daniel, which is, what is the philosophy underlying the individual's rule or role, I should say, in determining their future? And as far as Islam is concerned, certainly militant Islam, there is no role for the individual. The individual's job is to completely follow blindly whatever the Imam is telling them, and whatever interpretation of the Quran is currently in vogue. And there's no question in my mind that we need to do everything, we being Israel needs to do everything to win this war as quickly and expeditiously as possible. And the fact that Hamas is still holding out after being decimated. By the way, this has a lot of similarities to why the Democrats continue to double down on open borders, more fentanyl into the US, more crime, more debt, more deficit, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's amazing how wedded people are to their broken philosophies. And no matter how much evidence there is that Hamas is a disaster, okay, you have them doubling down on this. And Israel is just going to aid and abet. I do agree with Anders that this is highly likely to be linked to Netanyahu's personal problems, his court cases, and so on and so forth. There's no obvious explanation right now other than that.
Yeah, I mean, talking about, you talked about the sort of the culture for the Palestinians, or the idea that we can just talk them out of, hating Jews. It reminded me of a scene from, I don't know if you guys watched the new show Fallout, that came out on Amazon, but for those who've seen it, basically it talks about the story. It's like a post-apocalypse, but some people were able, like sort of the original Americans were able to live in these like fallout shelters, and at some point they come out to the top after hundreds of years, and they catch some sort of wasteland people, like basically savages, and they take them into cell, and they're like, well, we can feed them cake, and we can teach them Kant, we can like educate them to be civilized, and then the people from the wasteland slaughter them, because they have no concept of rights. They have no sort of those American ideas that sort of were preserved in those shelters. Instead, they had the sort of tribal culture that we had thousands of years ago and has resurfaced in this post-apocalyptic scenario, which I found funny because it reminded me of that. But yeah, going to you, Anders, what is really fueled? Where is this sort of like both anti-war thing coming from? Because if you ask people about like World War II and sort of our involvement, they would, most people I think would agree that sort of we had to do anything we could to sort of like stop the Nazis, including bombing German cities, including dropping the atom bombs. But I seem to recall even I don't know when I first heard about this idea, but people now are saying, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was unnecessary. They were going to surrender already. That it was just, we just wanted to we just wanted to try out new weapons, and that was the only reason that sort of that was used. And similar to we hear even now, like that piece of shit, historian who talks about the war crimes of the Allies, like the bombing of the German cities. So, Anders, do you think we are going into shifting cultures, where basically we will go back and say no, even what Allies did during World War II was too much? Basically saying you cannot fight a war. There is really no way to fight the war. I mean, when you listen to the UN, it's pretty much the way Israel has conducted the war was probably the most civilized war you could ever do, and I don't think you should have a civilized war. War is inherently a rejection of civility started by the other side. But yeah, Anders, that's a very long question, so maybe you can pick up something of this, of generally
Okay.
what is really behind these ideas.
Where to start? Well, fundamentally, it's a question of philosophy, obviously. And we have had decades of multiculturalism and egalitarianism and the worship of the little guy. And that is certainly coming, what we're seeing in being promoted and implemented here in many cases. When it comes to whether the culture can change back, sure it can. But that again is a long-term project, and that is probably a project that starts in education, both higher and lower education. And speaking for the US in this country, well, there is some opposition to the ruling order. We'll see where it goes with higher education and so on and so forth. I mean, as objectivists, as radicals for capitalism, we know that the ultimate solution, the vision, if you like, is a total separation of state and education, in which case good and bad ideas will be able to freely compete in the marketplace of ideas, and that's how you start to get good ideas surfacing and winning the day and eventually winning the war. As it currently stands, the bad ideas, the bad philosophies are unfortunately cemented into many of our not only educational institutions, but you talked about the UN and the vast majority of international organizations. So when we say, for instance, that we have talked many times here about World War II and Japan and really the right approach here from Israel vis-a-vis Gaza and the Palestinians in general would be a very similar approach. And we know that the dropping the atomic bombs on Japan was a perfectly moral action because it saved hundreds of thousands of American lives. Because remember, the Japanese started it, right? And the same can be applied analogously here in Israel. And I've said multiple times, and with the risk of sounding like a broken record, that the only way of getting lasting peace in this part of the world is for Israel to occupy indefinitely both Gaza and the West Bank and southern Syria and southern Lebanon, and then slowly but surely start to grant rights to the citizens there as they start to show that they're able to handle them. Property rights is the first one, which is a wonderful institution that brings out the best in people very quickly. And when there is an opportunity to act on your self-interest and trade voluntarily with others, people start to change relatively quickly. But it's a generational project again. And right now, I mean, it ain't gonna happen. You can see that. Unfortunately, Israel will probably just continue muddle along. And yeah, in 5-10 years from now, wherever this current conflict ends, but in 5-10 years, we'll have a repeat of the same scenario again, and that will continue until the Israelis grasp once and for all what it takes to create peace in this part of the world.
We have a new member, Thomas. Thank you so much, and also a super chat from Jonathan. Thank you so much. And yeah, talking more about this egalitarianism, I think Ayn Rand talks about it in the Age of Envy, so people can check out that essay. And when it comes to sort of what made it more institutional, I think is the UN. Funnily enough, yesterday we talked about this member of European Parliament from Ireland, and he brought up the UN Charter. So I was like, okay, let me actually read the UN Charter and see what's there. Funnily enough, UN Charter is about as long as the US Constitution, which talks about the importance of the words and not just the length of a document, because those two things gave us very different institutions. But when you go to the UN Charter, and I think it's pretty much very much up top, maybe in the Article 2 or 3, it talks about that all states in the UN are basically equal. They all have the same weight, and they all have the same sort of right to exist as a sort of nation. And I think that is already that sort of egalitarianism that I think Ayn Rand talks about. Not egalitarianism in a sort of, as we could say, the American Revolution way, basically the idea of equality before the law. Basically, we are all equal. We are all equal when it comes to how a government treats us, but it doesn't mean we'll all have the same wealth. It doesn't mean anything when it comes to sort of the results. It's just that politically you will not be discriminated based on your color, based on the color of your skin, based on where you come from, anything in that regard. But the idea of egalitarianism that I think the UN is pretty much promoting is this idea that you have to treat everybody equally, no matter what their values are, no matter what their fundamentals are. So then, I have to correct myself because I've been referring to that if Taliban takes over Afghanistan, they can go into UN. Apparently, they didn't accept yet sort of Taliban's participation in the UN, although they are already inviting them to some sort of UN sponsored events when it comes to like climate change and things, which Taliban is
Probably
definitely
the Human
not
Rights
doing.
Council as well.
Yeah,
Well, I think they
exactly.
would have to be first part of the UN itself. But even if you sort of ignore Taliban, you can take different nations such as China. China, the Communist Party of China, has decided to violently take over the government that was currently there in China, and as a reward, not only they were allowed to enter the UN, they were allowed to actually take the permanent seat at the UN Security Council, and the actual China, the Republic of Taiwan, has actually been completely removed out of the UN to the extent that basically they are not even allowed to go in because to be allowed to go in, the Big Five have to agree, which of course China still considers Taiwan a part of China. So they would never be allowed. So this is the sort of equality and big quotation marks on equality that the UN is giving you is the fact that you might be, and I mean, Palestinian territories are part of the, or Arab Observer State of the UN. You can have a terrorist organization, the PLO, that manages to get some land, is allowed to get some land, and now they have an observer status. Or you can be Hamas and you get help of UNRWA because you you violently took over some part of the earth, you get some validity. That is the sort of equality that UN is giving. It's not individual rights, it's not anything liberty wise, it's not anything western, it's simply who has the guns in some region. And yeah, I mean, Michael, maybe we can talk a little bit more about this idea of egalitarianism, which I think is what is fundamentally really ruining even the Gaza war. It's the idea that, well, yes, everybody agrees Israel has a right to defend itself, but you know, Palestinians have a right to their land, or they have a right to self-determination. So we have to sort of balance these two rights.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about. I mean, we're just one quick comment on the idiots, and they're really scary idiots. I mean, obviously they didn't have kids that died in the Japanese attacks or died during World War II. And it wasn't just America that the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki saved. It was the entire Allied forces that were fighting in Japan. Remember, if their thesis, which is that they were about to surrender anyway, were true, we wouldn't have had to drop the second bomb. I mean, really, you don't have to be very smart to realize how completely moronic. And this idea that they were about to surrender, if they had seen one bomb drop and they were about to surrender, surely they would have surrendered. That would have been the catalyst to surrender. But there was a very definitive decision by the emperor not to surrender after one bomb, to see what would happen, thereby leading to the second bomb. And it is absurd to say that we should have continued to put American and other allied lives at risk and not use what we had to use. The irony, of course, of all this is that the entire Manhattan Project was started mainly as a response to what was perceived to be going on in Germany, and probably was going on in Germany, to develop the atomic bomb. And it ended up that Germany had already surrendered, but Japan was not going to surrender. Remember that Germany had already given up. And this is the other point. Japan was not ready to surrender, because if they were, they would have surrendered. Japan kept fighting after Germany went down. And it is so, it's disgusting. And I think we who try to use rationality and logic and objectivism to assess ideas need to flatly reject these absurd notions of some rewritten history. Never mind the dead soldiers and the maimed soldiers and the injured soldiers and all of the World War II veterans who are still alive that are here today and kept this country and the rest of the West safe. So that's my comment on the situation from Japan, and we need to reject those ideas outright. They are despicable. The second point I would make is about the United Nations, which I think somewhere has that the countries that join it are supposed to be peace-loving or dedicated to peace, I believe. That's a fundamental part. Now, we obviously have countries in the UN who are admitted that have no interest in peace, never have, and frankly have never been at peace. That's part of the complete hypocrisy of the UN. But the worst part I think about it is, and I agree with you that the judgment is if you're a country, you get a seat at the table. It's completely consistent with the left-wing progressive view that if you're a human being and you're born as a human being, you have complete rights to everything regardless of your effort. And it's exactly the same pervasive, corrupted philosophy, which has no place in reality. I mean, if every human being decided I deserve to be fed, clothed, and housed because I'm simply born a human and I have to do nothing to deserve it, obviously everybody would be starving to death and would freeze to death. Right? We need people to actually do the work. And part of that work is we've decided as a Western culture, and the beauty of life, liberty, property rights, and the pursuit of happiness. And I love Anders' point about how important property rights are to all of this, to enable life, liberty, and property, and of course, the pursuit of happiness. We've decided that people actually do have to be acting on their own behalf and not infringing on other people's liberty. But you are responsible. As an able-bodied adult, you are responsible for your existence. Nobody owes that to you. Just being born did not give you a whole bunch of things that you get from the other people, from society. That's the other beauty that the left loves to talk about. Society, as if it weren't made up of other people that have to work harder than you do in order to support you. So this whole attitude in the United Nations that simply showing up at the door as a human being who represents a country gives you free admission. The best part of it is guess who's paying for all this? The majority of the money to run the United Nations comes from the West, mainly the US, but from the West, which is beautiful because the West does actually abide primarily by peace-loving, anti-imperialistic tendencies now. And yes, the West was imperialistic back when that's how civilization ran. Just like women did not have a right to vote anywhere in the world. And certainly they have less rights in every Islamic country that exists today. So let's not start down that path, okay? Things were that way back then. They aren't anymore. The West doesn't try to take over Western countries or non-Western countries. We don't do that. In fact, we give up a lot of these countries, sometimes really bad for those countries that we, quote, get hands off on. And guess what? We not only have to sit at the table and listen to these people that are completely fundamentally evil and corrupt, and those are the right words, but we actually pay for them. We are back to funding our own destruction. And that is the most remarkable part of this entire story.
Yeah, you talked about the sort of the peace-loving thing. So it's actually in the Article 4 under Chapter 2 membership. Membership in the United Nations is open to all other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present charter and in the judgment of organization are able and willing to carry out these obligations. I mean,
which is why the Taliban should have a seat at the table.
Well, now they're peace-loving. Now that they already took over.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, Anders, anything more to say about basically the
Well, I think
egalitarianism?
what we're seeing here and what we've seen for a long time is kind of an institutionalized hatred of the good for being good. That's what you see in the UN. That's what you see in these international organizations. So, and the good in this case is, you can basically use the statement that Michael was reciting or paraphrasing, the right to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. that is an insult to a lot of these people who are at heart collectivists, religious mystics, who truly believe that the individual has to be subordinated the collective, whatever that collective is, whether it's the state or your faith or any other kind of group. And for as long as we're sanctioning that, it will continue, and it's only a revival of Western civilization, of the confidence of Western civilization that would put an end to it. And with Western civilization, I basically mean the founding principles of the United States, and to the extent that some of that has been adopted in other Western countries.
We have a super chat from Alex. Thank you so much. She says the Palestinian movement was started by a Nazi who plotted to murder millions. That is irrelevant fact, but Americans are guilty indefinitely. And yeah, that is what we sort of see. I mean, people still try to sort of bring up everything they can against America from the past, instead of saying, well, we are here now, let's see where we can go from here. And they do the same thing with Palestinians. 80 years ago, Arabs have lost the war against Israel, so now today's Palestinians somehow still have a not only right to specific parts of those lands, but also this right for all the people, all the Palestinians from the world, basically, to go back into this. And that is simply ridiculous. And it is not implied anywhere else. And it is only applied against Israel, again, with the big help of the UN, since when it comes to any General Assembly, Israel is actually a permanent agenda. So every single time we have to talk about Israel. And that goes to, I think, Anders's point of sort of the hatred of the good. It's because Israel is the one free nation in the Middle East. It is targeted out, and even when it comes to the UN, the free nations are actually a minority. Most nations in the UN are authoritarian, are not anything close to Western individual rights respecting. We also have a super chat from Mary. Mary, thank you so much. She says, peace loving, in quotes, means no retaliation allowed. I mean, yeah, with this idea of peace loving, well, were Americans peace loving when they entered the World War II? Let's say, okay, they were attacked by Japanese, but they joined the war against the Germans. Is that peace loving? I mean, or, UK and France joining the war against Germany because Poland was attacked. Well, technically, they entered the new war, right? They expanded the front. It was just Poland. It was just a regional war, and they expanded it to world war. Is that peace loving? I mean, the idea that peace should be the standard instead of justice, instead of individual rights, instead of anything else, instead of this sort of weird concept of peace that, how do you even define it, when do you even define it, when now it's enough to stop the war? It should always come, they should replace the UN Charter with the American Constitution, and maybe we can start doing something. But that would also mean most nations would have to be kicked out of the UN, since they do not uphold that standard in any way. So we don't have that much time. So I'll just bring sort of one last thing, and it's this idea that basically something that happened when Israel has stopped the aid from going into Gaza. Some people in Israel actually took it to the Supreme Court, saying this is a breach of international law. This is basically evil. You can't do that. And the Supreme Court of Israel has decided no, since Israel is not the governing state, or is not the government of Gaza, they don't have any obligation to sort of deliver aid to those areas. Hamas is still a control of Gaza. And, I was glad about the decision, since, now it's constitutional in Israel that you don't have to feed your enemies, or rather that, yeah, basically that you don't have to feed your enemies. You still can, which that's the part that should be ruled unconstitutional. although I don't know much about Israel constitution, so maybe it
They
is
don't
not
have one.
technically, yeah.
Seriously, they don't. Yeah. Go ahead.
So yeah, and my biggest question there was, why is Israel not a governing state in Gaza yet? Why is still Hamas considered sort of the government in Gaza? Why has that not had change? I mean, Michael, we are more than 500 days into war, and it's still Israel is still not controlling all of Gaza. Is still not uh, completely got rid of Hamas. Is still trying to sort of maintain this control from the distance, basically just controlling the choke points and sort of from the distance, looking and trying to search for Hamas instead of completely occupying the area and trying to set up something for the future.
Yeah, well, look, I think there's a lot of things here, most of which I don't know, but a couple of key points, I think. The first thing is, I don't know that people understand what, even at the public level, as opposed to what was really going on behind the scenes, how much Biden handcuffed what Israel could and couldn't do during the entire war. What we've been told externally is it's starting to come out now. It was merely the tip of the iceberg, and behind the scenes, there was a lot of constraint on Israel. I mean, it wasn't just the 2,000 pound bombs that were held up. There were actual bullets that were held up. I mean, that for machine guns, because they were piercing, these were penetrating bullets. And it goes on and on and on. And this will undoubtedly come out in some erudite House hearings and Senate hearings for sure in the future, if for no other reason than the Republicans want to do in the Democrats and make a whole point of this. But it will come out. So I don't think anything was possible until Trump came into office. I think it's an extremely important question to ask. What happened after January 21st? And the answer is not much. One of the biggest criticisms there are of Benjamin Netanyahu is that he doesn't make decisions. He lets things ride for as long as he possibly can. He wants to see if he ends up in a corner and then sees what happens. There is a lot of public distaste for occupying Gaza again since they pulled out, because all anybody remembers is 2 and 3 soldiers dying every day in those situations, and they're tired of that. And then there's the complete fruitcakes, and I mean that with all love. The people fruitcakes who think that Hamas is suddenly going to become civilized and return the hostages. Because Hamas has been behaving so well for 558 days that all of a sudden we're going to get the hostages back, which is, you have to be an idiot. That's like saying tomorrow the sun isn't going to rise. We know what the history has shown. They're not getting the hostages back. Hamas will go down and they will die, and they might kill all the hostages. But giving the hostages back is not going to happen, and Israel should not pull out. So that we're in a very much Benjamin Netanyahu, neither here nor there, no definitive thing being done, a fake attack, meaning there's no hell raining down on Gaza right now. It's more of the same thing. And you're absolutely right. And there's no appetite to go in there and finish the job. And Anders alluded to some of this earlier, and I don't know why, but those are some observations that I think are important. Whatever is happening there, it's nothing definitive, and it's nothing that's going to change the situation in any meaningful way. We could be sitting here in 6 months with the same crap in front of us.
We have a super chat from Bronx Guy Can Hill Road. Thank you so much. Anders, any last thoughts? And also, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm still a staunch supporter of Israel as the only outpost of Western civilization in a largely uncivilized part of the world. And that will continue for a while. But I have to say that my patience is wearing thin due to the lack of decisive action on behalf of the Israelis. And I understand a lot of the reasons for it, but at some point or another, things have to start to change for Israel, for no other reason for the Israelis to save themselves from future future disaster. I think you, Daniel, asked the question, or was it Michael beginning? Do they really want a state? And I'm sure they do, but they don't appear to understand what that entails in the long run vis-a-vis their neighbors. You can find me on Substack, andersingemarson.substack.com, sorry. And you can pick up my book on Amazon, Think Right or Wrong, Not Left or Right.
And Michael, where can people find you?
Yeah, Kaufman with 2 Fs on LinkedIn.
And with that, thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching.
Thanks.
We'll be back tomorrow with another
Cheers.
episode of The Daily Objective and The Reality Show. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.